and welcome to News Desk. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Girish Banerjee.
Russia has been pummeling Ukraine over the last few days. Over the weekend and into Monday, Moscow attacked its neighbour with thousands of drones and missiles. It was the biggest Russian onslaught since the start of the war, when Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The attack saturated Ukraine's air defences, killing at least 13 people, according to Kiev.
And these attacks even prompted US President Donald Trump to say that Russia's President Vladimir Putin had gone absolutely crazy. And more recently, that Putin is, quote, playing with fire. He's also warned that Moscow risks new sanctions.
Now, the Kremlin responded to that with these comforting words. Trump was showing signs of emotional overload and that Trump is not fully informed about the conflict. Meanwhile, Russia is said to be massing troops on parts of the Russian border, including near the Ukrainian city of Sumy. So this week, we're asking this question: Putin's war strategy, brutal, calculated and working?
That's the question. So is it working? We've already had people responding to that question that we had already posted in the community post on our YouTube channel. And here is a sample of some of the kind of comments that we have received, beginning with @Vicmo25, who is saying, and I quote, "This man played Trump like a fiddle by engaging in peace talks with the US and acted like he wanted peace to Trump. He allowed the world to put their guard down while he continued his onslaught." We also have another comment from @Felipe de la Cruz 8565, who's saying, "Ukraine and USA are not serious about peace. They are dragging out. They lost in field." Then you have another comment from @Andrew Zaplatsinski. I'm sure I pronounced that completely incorrectly, but I think you know who you are, saying, "In Ukraine, Putin is trying to swallow a porcupine. Russia is weaker now than 3 years ago." And lastly, another comment from @Alpha China, who is saying, "Putin is revealing himself to be a master strategist." Now, that's just a sample of some of the comments that we've had, and they do reflect really a divergent sense of views, don't they? And I think we'll be hearing a lot more of those of that divergence as we go along in this discussion and this stream. And my able colleague Cherry will be in the chat looking at all of your comments, and she'll be also bringing them into this discussion, and also for our experts later, won't you?
Yeah, and also, as always, I have a poll question for everyone. And here is what we're asking today. What's really going on between Trump and Putin? There are 4 options. Putin's playing Trump. Trump's in control. It's just political theater, or Trump's fine playing along. In fact, our viewers already have quite strong opinion about this poll question. For example, Helen says that regarding your poll, none of the above. Putin is ignoring Trump and Zelensky to continue with his original objectives. But if you have other opinions about our poll, please post it in the chat and we can bring it to our guest as well.
You know, you're talking about opinions, and you have one of our regulars on the chat, Carolina, already posting. She's saying that both Putin and Trump are now playing cards, while Zelensky remains stuck in between these two. That wasn't an option then.
Yeah, no, yeah. We only have 4 options.
Well, you can only do 4, can't you?
I know, but then you can always feel free to sort of post in the chat like everybody else is posting, and we can try and bring that in, or until the time that YouTube increases the number of options available.
Yes, and let's hope they will. And also a quick one to Carolina. It's good to know that you're with us, because I know you haven't been particularly well, so great that you are with us. Let me just introduce you, or at least tell you who will be coming up in terms of our guests, because I haven't done that yet. Shortly, we will be speaking to our correspondent, Max Zander. He is in Ukraine, in Kiev, and he will give us the very latest from there, telling us what happened at the weekend, because he was actually in the capital and can give us a first-hand experience of what it was like. And later we're going to be speaking to Professor Katarzyna Zusk. She is a Russia expert at the Norwegian Institute for Defence Studies. And we're also going to be chatting with DW's Russia analyst, Konstantin Eggert. And it's always a great joy to speak to him, because he has lots of very personal and quite extraordinary stories that he can tell, along with all his analysis as well. So we're looking forward to speaking to him a little bit later. We're hoping to speak to Max, but I think that maybe he's not quite ready at the moment. Oh, he is ready. That's fantastic. Good. We're going to speak then to Max Zandy. As I said, he is in Kiev, in Ukraine. And you, as I said, hi there. Hi, Max. As I said, you were there at the weekend as those drones and those missiles were falling. We've got some pictures of that, but just give us a sense of what it was like.
Yeah, Alex, I mean, it was quite intense. I mean, I have been in and out of Ukraine over the last 2.5 years or so, reporting from here, and I have experienced the one or the other large-scale attack on the capital, but this, I must say, was probably one of the largest attacks that I have witnessed, and in fact, it was the largest attack in the history of the full-scale invasion. So, I mean, I was in the beginning when this all happened after the air raid. I was air raid alert. I was standing on this very balcony here, and I could look into the sky, and we could hear everything. We could hear this, this machine gun fire, these mobile drone units trying to take out the drones. You could hear the drones. They sound like scooters, pretty much, like slowly flying scooters. You could also see, the sky being illuminated at night from tracer rounds. You could see the explosions. You could see burning debris coming down slowly, and every once and again you could hear louder explosions, and these likely were missiles being intercepted, so air defense at work there. So it was quite intense, and I mean, this happened in the middle of the night above people's heads that are trying to sleep, and a lot of people there, for them it's like makes for very long and very scary nights.
And as you said, Max, you've been to and from Kiev since February 2022. I'm just wondering, does it feel different this time with what you're experiencing and how people are sort of dealing with this?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, people are kind of used to this. Some of this has happened before. I mean, I personally was in the city when last summer when the Children's Hospital Ahmadiyat got attacked, and there was a direct impact in the city, which sounded a little bit different. But of course, I mean, you can only get used to so much, and it is still incredibly stressful for people. And with these large-scale attacks, with the Russians sending more and more combined drones and missiles at the same time, ballistic missiles, people know that some of this is going to slip through the air defense. It's going to overwhelm the air defense. Air defense is partially also depleted here. So it is scary. And people, from what we're hearing, from what we're seeing, people again have started seeking shelter, going into the bathroom, for example, for minimum protection, having these two walls in case something comes down close to you. But also more and more people, take their little children, go to the nearest shelter. This may be the metro station, which is about maybe 10 minutes away, and spend the night on the platform rather than, taking their chances at home.
And with so much focus now on Ukraine and its allies trying to get a ceasefire so they can at some point secure a future peace deal, what do you think Moscow was really trying to achieve from these attacks?
Yeah, I mean, it's always really difficult to see or to think. I mean, you're not in the head of the leadership in Moscow, right? So you don't really know what they're trying to achieve there. I mean, in the past, some of these attacks were clearly focused at energy infrastructure, especially in winter, for example. Some of these attacks may be intend to take out parts of the industry that could be used in the war, but. These attacks, especially at this time, this large scale, this looks more like the Russians are really trying to assert dominance here. They're trying to terrorize the population. They're likely trying to also send a message to Ukraine's allies that even though 3.5 years have gone and you've sent so much air defense, we can still cause scenes like this. We can still attack these cities and slip past the air defense. Essentially what happened also, people were injured and people were killed.
Can I just ask a
please.
quick question about, because as you were saying, Max, hi, Birish, this thing, because it was the largest air assault using drones and missiles in the start of the war. And I remember, like, towards, I think, the middle of the war, I think sometime last year, there were these reports that Russia is running out of missiles, for example, and it doesn't have enough projectiles to essentially fire into Ukraine. Do you get the sense that they have been able to replenish those stocks, or are they using more drones than missiles for these kinds of attacks?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure about the production capacity of Russian missiles. I'm sure it's also a well-kept secret, but from what we've been hearing, from what the Ukrainian Air Force has been saying, I believe this largest attack from Saturday to Sunday involved roughly 300 drones. Okay. And about, I think, 60 to 70 missiles. And so they have been ramping up their capacity to produce drones.
And Max, you talked about how people were taking shelter anywhere on the streets, and of course, Ukrainians have been living this for the past almost 3.5 years. But how do you think these kinds of attacks affect Ukrainians, particularly those on the front line?
Yeah, I mean, in general, people are tired. It's incredibly stressful. People in the cities are stressed by these attacks. They're scared. Lots of anxiety there. If you're talking about soldiers, people on the front line, the same and worse. Many of them who have been fighting since the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, for example, have been fighting ever since and haven't had a break. If you're in the armed forces, for the most part, there is no real demobilization because there's not enough soldiers to replace them. So if you've been fighting for 3 years, there hasn't been a chance for you to be demobilized. So morale can vary also depending on what part of the armed forces you're in. Also, whether or not you signed up voluntarily, or if you have been drafted, for example, if you have been mobilized. So we still meet people. I met a bunch of young people. We were shooting a report in the Kiev region. The Ukrainians came up with a program to incentivize young people below the draft age of 25, from 18 to 24, to sign up. They have good benefits. They have a signing bonus, and it's limited to just 1 year. So, but these people seem fairly motivated. But there are very few of those nowadays. I would say it's fatigue, and it's a very difficult. Also, not knowing how long this war will end, and knowing that you will have to stay until the very end.
Yeah. Let's just turn to the front line, because we've got a map which Birish can hopefully show.
I have that map. I don't know, Max, if you can see this, but maybe you can talk us through where we are with the general situation on the front lines. I don't know if you can see Sumy right there. My cursor is hovering above Sumy, and right here is basically Kursk, which is where the Ukrainians had carried out an incursion last year. This is the Kursk Oblast in Russia. Reports coming in that Russia has pushed most of the Ukrainian forces back over the border over here in the direction of Sumy. But Max, can you just talk us through where we are when it comes to the front lines?
Yeah, so in general, the front line hasn't changed a whole lot over the last couple of weeks and months. Perhaps we can have a look at the east. If you can pull up, let's say, the southeast of Donetsk region.
Further down here?
You will, perhaps we can, yeah, if you go a little bit to the east, we can, a little bit further.
Where do you want me to go? Name the place.
There's I would like you to go to the town of Pokrovsk.
Yeah, okay. I can go to Pokrovsk because I generally know where it is. And there's this nifty map that I'm using, just so people are aware. It is from this company called Deep State, which is a Ukrainian company, as we've been able to sort of gather. That's Pokrovsk there.
Open source, isn't it?
It's an open source map. that we are using to look at Ukrainian and Russian positions at the moment. Can you see all of that, Max? That's Pokrovsk right there.
I can see all of that. Yeah,
Perfect.
just to let our viewers know. So the red stuff, that is Russian-held territory. These squares with the crosses in it. These are the Russian units. Pokrovsk is a town that's been under attack since last year in fall. I visited last time in October, and the Ukrainians back then sent lots of reinforcements there to protect this town. It's a key city. There's a train line that runs through it. It has important connections, roads that go through it. So this is essential. This is something that the Russians have been trying to get for quite some time, throwing lots and lots of resources at it. From what I read, just in the last 24 hours, there were more than 60 assaults on Pokrovsk. But the Ukrainians are still able to hang on to this one. There have been incremental gains. If you can see these arrows, this is where the Russians are pushing forward. If you go a little bit, to the northeast, we can see it in this screen. Actually, there's a town of Konstantinivka. This is also a place where the Russians are putting a lot of pressure on there.
Sorry, what was that town?
It's just up a bit.
Now you zoom.
That's it. I think
Just up a bit. If you just drag the map up a little bit. Right, so you have Konstantinivka, and then you have Drushkivka, and at some point there's going to be Kramatorsk. So this is like one of the key towns that the Russians are trying to take. You can see before, just in front of Konstantinivka, there's another important road connection. So this is also one of the other things where the Russians are focusing on right now. Just to point out two areas there, but perhaps we want to have another look at Sumy.
Yeah.
And I can tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, because there's been talk, hasn't there, Max, about, President Zelensky today claiming 50,000 Russian troops are near Sumy, ready for a potential advance.
And there's Sumy right there.
And if you move in there, you can see these small arrows there.
Yeah, these
right?
ones.
If you go to the border.
Yeah.
Exactly. So from what the Ukrainian president is saying is that 50,000 troops, as Alex has just said, have been deployed to that area and are already working on Ukrainian territory there. The Russians haven't made any claims to Sumy as of now. It's like they have of Donetsk region, Zaporizhia region, and Kherson, for example. But they said that President Putin said he wants to create a buffer zone there. So from what we understand is that likely he wants to occupy Ukrainian territory on the Ukrainian side of the border, at least 10 kilometers. As he puts it, as he frames it, to protect Russian territory from Ukrainian assaults. But potentially, this is also about just removing troops from the eastern front line from these key cities, potentially that we just talked about, to defend that part of the border. But the Ukrainians say they have made preparations. They are prepared for this. Just to remind you, just about a year ago in Kharkiv region, Kharkiv is right next to Sumy. It's to the east, at the border there. There has been an incursion. You can see the green there, and then there's a little bit of red, like bordering it. So there's still Russians in Kharkiv region, but they weren't able to create a buffer zone back then last year. So perhaps also experience from last year's attack is going to help the Ukrainians defend that. But 50,000 troops at the border certainly is something to worry about.
Can I just bring in 2 points here? Because you guys have been looking at all this green on the map. The green refers to territory that's been liberated by Ukrainian armed forces. And the second question, you were talking about basically referencing what President Zelensky said about creating this buffer zone. President Zelensky, I believe, also said, correct me if I'm wrong, Max, that the Russians are potentially looking at making a 10-mile deep buffer zone. Is that only around here in Sumy, or is that along the entire front line, which, if I zoom out, is a pretty long front line all the way from the north here down to the south? What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much insight, but I doubt that there's going to be a 10-kilometer or 10-mile, whatever, let's say 10-kilometer buffer zone across the entirety. That's impossible to take, and it's going to be impossible to hold.
Max, thanks very much for all those updates. One thing before we let you go that I did just want to bring in is the fact that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Berlin as we speak. He's been meeting with Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz. We've got some pictures actually of them meeting today. But I just wanted to get an idea from you of what it is that Zelensky really wants. And we know that he's been, for example, asking for more support with weapons, and particularly the long-range weapons. But what's sort of the update on that and the conversations that they've been having?
Yeah, I mean, in general, a lot is at stake in one way or another. But one crucial part of President Zelensky by going to Germany also is to show not just the German leadership, but also the public, not in Germany, in Europe, and in the world, that they're still fighting and that this fight still matters. So kind of like to raise attention for that. In addition to that, what I think became clear in the presser that Chancellor Merz and Ukrainian President Zelensky held there is that they both stood together. It's a strong sign of solidarity. Germany reiterated that it would help Ukraine for as long as it takes. But there were also a few other issues that were discussed. Chancellor Merz has been calling for more pressure, has also promised more pressure on Russia should Russia not show that it actually wanted to properly negotiate and seriously negotiate an end to hostilities. And they were signaling to the Russian president, but also to President Trump, who both of them thanked for his efforts, that Ukraine is actually doing something. And just one more point, weapons is always a big issue. Now the new chancellor doesn't want to talk publicly about what weapons he may or may not send to Ukraine. But one thing that was discussed already yesterday here in Ukraine is that President Zelensky said, we have our own Ukrainian arms production, and we want to ramp it up. So, but for that, we need more. It has been ramped up already, but they need more funding. So, money is one thing, but also corporations with German companies, and the Ukrainians want to build more autonomous weapons, more drones, want to build their own missiles. And from what Friedrich Merz said today, it seems like he's wanting to support this initiative and help through in these ways give Ukraine whatever it needs.
I'm glad you brought in the point of Friedrich Merz, and I'm glad that you're responding to that, Max, because John Doe, for example, has been asking a few questions related to this visit from President Zelensky to Berlin. He's asking, is some momentum currently building that is good for Ukraine now that Merz is taking a much clearer stance towards Russia? And what's the impact on the morale of Ukrainians? So basically, what's the response been to what we've heard just in the past couple of hours, haven't we?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, like, change of leadership is an opportunity, especially with Olaf Scholz being seen as quite hesitant in sending weapons and making bold decisions in favor of Ukraine. So dealing with Merz is perhaps easier for the Ukrainians, but at the same time, we have a Trump administration in the White House, which makes things a little bit more difficult. So, I mean, there is perhaps there's some positives aspects to this for the Ukrainians, but it's certainly not all easy.
Max, thanks so much for joining us from Kiev. Thank you for all your insights and for all that latest information as well. We really appreciate it and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Max. Stay safe. Bye.
Thanks, guys.
And now is a very good time to bring in our next guest. It is Professor Katarzyna Zusk, and she is a Russia expert at the Norwegian Institute for Defence Studies. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. We did just hear from Max. He mentioned Trump, Donald Trump, US President, of course. And that seems a good moment then just to talk about him and listen to what he said over the past few days. This was in response to Russia's recent bombardment at the weekend. Let's just take a listen to what he had to say.
I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time. always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
So Trump there pretty emotional, it seems, about what Putin was doing in terms of Ukraine. And we know that he also put some messages out on Truth Social, calling, I think, the one we've got
if Dustin
there.
would like to sort of bring that in. This is something that he posted on Truth Social. This was on the 26th of May, so around the time that these drone attacks and missile attacks were happening on Kiev and other places. A very long post, but essentially talking about the very good relationship that he has with Vladimir Putin, and then saying he has gone, quote, absolutely crazy, needlessly killing a lot of people. And I'm not just talking about soldiers. And also issuing a warning to President Zelensky, saying President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. And also blaming his predecessor, calling it a Biden's war, not Trump's. And it's also Putin's and Zelensky's war. That is what Donald Trump posted on the 26th of May.
Yeah, and then just yesterday he said that Putin was playing with fire. So my question, Katarzyna, is what do you make of this language? Do you think that this could finally be the moment that Trump gets tough with Putin, or have we heard all this kind of thing before?
Well, it's really hard to say because we've seen that, President Trump has threatened Putin before, Russia with severe sanctions. If Russia would not come to the negotiation table, not much has happened. And if we look at the time period from the very beginning of the Trump administration, if we compare his attitudes toward Ukraine and Russia, certainly it doesn't show any severe or harsh attitudes towards Russia. He has this special views or relationship, as he says, with President Putin. He seems to be quite looking for a solution that is not necessarily in Ukraine's interest. So I think the only way to see whether this is actually a change, we have to see to what extent it will be actually backed up by any action.
And this is something that people are commenting on, Professor, in our community chat as well. I'm just going to read out three of them at the same time. So you have Ilyas Bashir, who's saying, I quote, Putin has assurances from Trump. That's why the Kremlin is pushing too far and well calculated. Then you also have Nilay Chaturvedi, who's saying the problem with Trump's approach is he has never encountered people like Putin who want power more than anything else and aren't going to be swayed by trade deals. And there is this question at the end from user PJG, who's asking, why will President Putin care about Trump's tantrums?
That's actually a good question. I think Russia has shown over the past few months that they do not want to challenge Trump directly. What is certainly a hallmark of the Trump presidency thus far is unpredictability. And this is the element that is also hard to deal and hard to plan for in Moscow. So we've heard also from the spokeswoman from the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs recently that they are looking for a solution. They try to cater to President Trump to say that Russia is actually doing something, while at the same time actually totally ignoring the calls to a real negotiation process, as we've seen by the massive aerial attacks over the past few days on Ukraine. Of course, still the pressure. Offenses in different places, the offense on the front, where Russia seems to still have a plan to try to break the Ukrainian defenses. That was also the hope last year, which we did not realize. But I think this is still the intent from Russia. They try to certainly strengthen their negotiation positions before they even will sit at the table. So Trump is, if you look overall, Trump has been on overall positive to Russia. He's seen as a disruptor who accelerates the decline of the traditional U.S. foreign policy, the Western cohesion that undermines the liberal norms and values that the alliance has been based on. It seems that right now the alliance is more based on more transactional approach, which is a very fundamental change, and also. It also validates, it seemed, the long-held Russian argument that the U.S. Rules-based order is hypocritical in nature. It is not about values, it is not about principles or international law. It is about raw power and self-interest. And also Trump's America First approach, this transactional diplomacy mirrors, it seems, Russia's realist and quite cynical, frankly, view of international relations, where there are no permanent friends. It's all about interest and power. So this has been very beneficial to Russia. It seems there have been a number of appearances and speeches by Putin where he mentioned Trump. It doesn't seem that he's a high respect for Trump. It seems that over the past few months, I mean, they are trying to basically to play him again, giving appearances of being cooperative, not challenging Trump directly. They do not want that, but at the same time pushing ahead on the front in Ukraine.
So that's interesting. You said that you think that they are trying to play Trump. Then you think that's pretty clear, do you?
Well, I do think that, again, from what I gathered from speeches by President Putin and the facts on the ground, I mean, Putin and Russia does not seem to be interested in negotiation process at this moment. And this is because, again, they are still pushing ahead. I guess they also, or based, of course, I guess based on the information I have, they also hope that the defensive, that they at some point they will be able to push through a larger offensive. There seem to be movements toward that, and they will break the Ukrainian front. Of course, the problems with air defenses, as we've heard from the reports a moment ago, it's also something that Putin hopes, right? I mean, that both Ukraine is struggling with personnel and air defenses. The Patriots are important that are coming from the United States, especially important for the ballistic missiles attacks we saw during the weekend, unfortunately. Ukraine was unable to protect itself against that. So the hope is that, as long as Putin is able to make some movement, I don't think Russia will be interested in any real negotiations. They are delaying that process, obviously.
And there's lots of comments coming in again in the community chat, Professor, to do with the view within Russia and what Russia and President Putin might be thinking. Because, I mean, let's be honest, no one knows the mind of President Putin better than President Putin himself. So just a few comments, for example, Be Positive 99 remarking there that Putin invaded Ukraine to protect Russian citizens living in Ukraine. He says, but the war has killed more Russian citizens than anything. That is one comment. And then there is also a direct question from Divos, also a regular user, who's asking, what percentage of the Russian population is still in support of this quote-unquote special military operation?
These are very good. These are great questions. So the first, that Putin attacked Ukraine to protect Russian population or Russian citizens or Russian ethnic Russians, I would not agree with that. This has been certainly used, and this has been actually a part of Russian foreign policy doctrine, that Russia has the right to protect not only Russian citizens, but even ethnic Russians beyond Russian borders. But of course, we can go into the reasons of why Russia attacked Ukraine. This is quite complicated, and I think it's also important to understand the long-standing Russian strategic objectives where Ukraine plays a central role. I'm happy to talk about that if you are interested. But yes, it's true that the cost of the war that Russia has already paid is just staggering. So the recent numbers that we've received from open sources, including from the UK Ministry of Defense, is 950 50,000 wounded and killed. And in that number, it's up to 250,000 killed Russians. This is a huge number. And we are talking about 3 years. So by comparison, where Russia, when the Soviet Union went to Afghanistan, over 10 years, they lost 15,000. So the number is incredibly high. And it seems still that Putin has not paid the political price for this catastrophe. Of course, economically, Russia has been, the sanctions have been harsh, the harshest we can remember. And certainly they are undermining and hurting the Russian economy, which is the reason why the Russian diplomacy is trying to get rid of them. Militarily, of course, Russian conventional forces has been damaged, has been undermined, especially ground forces. Lots of material has also been lost. Many modernization program has been slowed down because of the war. So the cost is enormous. And however, what is interesting is that in the short term, the huge defense spending, we are talking about 43% this year, of overall state budget going to defense. Probably it is even higher because some of the funding that goes to defense is hidden under post in the state budget. So this is a huge, huge number.
Right.
But of course, to pay for that, Russia is paying with funding from wealth, from healthcare, from education. So basically, Putin is paying for this war with Russia's future. So this is what is interesting is the political price. That again, it seems that Putin has not paid that yet.
You know, you're talking about the future of Russia, and this is where I wanted to bring this question in from Nilay Chaturvedi, because you were talking about the short term and you're also talking about the future. So in the long term, if one looks at in the long term, the payoff for the long term, Nilay Chaturvedi is asking this question: hasn't Putin played the strategic long game better than most? That's from another of our regular users, Nilay Chaturvedi. Do you think Putin is getting a payoff in the long term better than other players?
So I think, first of all, Russia, so Putin is certainly very opportunistic. We've seen him acting, very good at exploiting opportunities that arise. But certainly the war in Ukraine is not just an opportunism, is a result of Russia's pursuit of long-standing strategic objectives that Russia has formulated and articulated and pursued over the past 20 years, and which say that Russia wants to reestablish itself as a great power in the international system. Russia wants to reestablish its sphere of privileged interests, of influence, in particular in the near abroad, but not only there, also in what Russia defines as regions of strategic interest, which is, for instance, the Middle East, parts of Africa, Latin America, Asia, etc. And Russia also wants to reshuffle the existing security system in Europe, which is centered around NATO and European Union, and the broader international system, actually, which Russia would like to see us, in words of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as a concert of great powers for the 21st century, basically a small club of great powers, very narrow, in fact, maybe Russia, China, and the United States, taking decisions, important decisions in Europe and globally. So Russia has pursued this interest, and actually Ukraine is a part of that big project. Ukraine is an important, almost, I would say, crown jewel in the project of reestablishing Russia. It's what Russia sees as its rightful place in the international system. So you could say that pursuing this interest, even, if Russia also had a number of setbacks, including, of course, in Ukraine, it has been there has been a strategic thought behind that. But of course, Russia also failed terribly in Ukraine. They were supposed to take Ukraine in a few days, and we are 3 years and 3 months into the war, and Russia hasn't still achieved the short-term objectives, which means, for instance, controlling the 4 territories they took in 2022. And made part annexed them. Russia doesn't control them all. So that's I think it's quite
I mean, how does that...
multi-layered answer.
I mean, that just sort of takes us back into the situation in Russia. I mean, how is this war being perceived on the ground? Does Putin still have support from Russians? Do we know that? Can we even tell that when, you know, when we're dealing with Russia and there's not so much information that can come out? But does he still have the support from the people that matter?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, the answer is not straightforward. First of all, as you mentioned, we have actually quite limited data coming from Russia, which made these kinds of assumptions. You know, we have to be careful making any conclusive statements about that. But there are some indications from polling that is still made by Levada Center, which has still credibility also in the West. Which shows that Putin actually enjoys quite high support. What is interesting, these polls over years show that, for instance, when Russia attacked or was in war with Georgia in 2008, when Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea in 2014, and when Russia went to war in Syria in 2015, the support for Putin was at the highest. It was around 80%, which is very high. So this is an indication that there is actually a support understanding for this war. We see, you know, there are some interviews from time to time we can hear made by journalists on the ground about that, and there are also disgruntled people unhappy about the price, the cost, the killing of Ukrainians. So it's certainly it is not a monolithical space. But overall, I think even if there would be a larger discontent, it's very, very difficult for the Russian citizens to express that, because the repressions in Russia, they reached Stalin level. People would be, you know, taken for saying word peace or saying anything critical about the war or about the Russian armed forces and given 10, 15-year sentences. Children are being taken from parents. So the level of repression is high, and the fear, of course, related to that is widespread, of course. So this is it's very difficult to explain and express any discontent.
But then on the other hand, I know you were talking about the economy before, but there's no doubt that there are many Russians who have done very well since the war in Ukraine started and have benefited from what Putin's doing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's the interesting part. When the sanctions were imposed, the expectations that basically the Russian economy would be almost instantly ruined didn't happen. Of course, the sanctions, they have an impact over time. And Russia has been weathering these sanctions relatively well. They receive also support from China. The huge defense spending also driving the economy. We've seen that the unemployment has fallen to post-Soviet low level. And many, this has been also driving salaries that increase. So actually, Russians have been living relatively well and not really feeling the impact of the war yet. In addition to recruit soldiers to this war, Russia has been paying high salaries to the soldiers, and if they die, they've been paying a huge amount of money to the families of the soldiers, which of course also can alleviate any discontent. So overall, thus far, Russia has been actually the Russian population hasn't really felt that much the impact of the war, which also can influence, you know, their attitudes towards the war and towards the regime. But there are cracks in the economy as well, inflation, and the long-term prospect looks pretty bad for Russia. So one assumption is that it's going to go worse and worse as we are nearing 2026. And actually, the Russian authorities have been operating with that number, 2026. They want to end the conflict by 2026 on conditions favorable to Russia. Whether this is related to the economic problems, it may well be.
It's interesting because I wanted to bring in a question that user John Jacob posted asking about, do sanctions work? And what you just said appeared to have been the answer to that. So I hope, John Jacob, you're satisfied with that answer.
Let me just pause you at the moment, Katarzyna, and very quickly, I just want to go to Cherry Chan, who's with everyone in the chat, just to get a flavour of what's being said there from you before we go bring in our next guest as well.
We have a lot of comments and questions in our chat. Actually, people are very active today. And one point I find interesting in the conversation in the chat is that so we previously mentioned how Zelensky is talking to Vladimir, and we talk about how Putin is talking to Trump. But some people are actually asking, why do we talk about Trump so much? What about European leaders? Where are they? Why aren't they talking to Putin, actually? And exactly. And a couple of people have raised these questions about European leaders' role in negotiating with Putin. So I think maybe we can ask this question to our experts too.
Well, let's just park that a moment and let's bring in our next guest, because Katarzyna Zusk is with us. She's a Russia expert from the Norwegian Institute for Defence Studies. But now we can also bring in Konstantin Egert, who is DW's Russia analyst. Great to see you as well, and thank you very much for joining us. We just had a very quick question there from in the chat, Konstantin. I don't know if you were listening to that, but just saying that there's a lot always about Trump when it comes to Putin, but why are other European leaders not speaking to Putin as well or having any contact with him? Do you have a quick answer to that?
Well, I think the quick answer, and by the way, thanks for the invitation. The quick answer is very simple. The European leaders, most of them, do not see the reason to talk to Putin because they understand what Putin's policy is, and they understand that, well, at least as of now, that doesn't look very promising to speak to Putin. His position is well known, and he's not ready for compromise.
Thank you for that. OK, before we go further, I think it's important that we just actually hear something from Vladimir Putin, because so far we haven't heard him at all. This is him speaking in February 2022. That's the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. Let's just listen to what he said on that day.
I decided to conduct a special military operation. It aims to protect people who have been bullied and subjected to genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years.
So that was Vladimir Putin there speaking in February 2022, using very strong, very contentious language there against Ukraine to defend his decision to invade the country. More than 3 years on, Konstantin, do you think that we've just been talking about it previously with Katarzyna, but do you think that people are within Russia are still supporting Putin in this war?
Well, look, in regimes like the Russian regime, the Chinese or the Iranian, it's very difficult to measure public opinion because no opinion poll ever reflects reality, because people are afraid to speak in such regimes. They perceive that usually such polls are conducted by telephone. So when someone calls you and says, I am from the All Russia Center for Sociological Surveys, people immediately perceive that it's not a pollster, that it's a secret police calling. So you have to give a reply that is basically acceptable to the authorities. However, we have all sorts of indirect, if you wish, proofs that there is a significant part of Russian society that supports this war, but at the same time, one has to qualify it. It supports the war because the war does not touch them directly. That's number one. Number two, my understanding, and that is also sort of a result of speaking to people in Russia, some remaining relatives, for example, you can still speak on, Signal and WhatsApp in a very sort of neutral way, but you can gauge the attitudes. A significant part of the population just isolated itself from any news of the war. They pretend it doesn't happen. And this, by the way, I think is the strongest support for Putin regime today. It's the indifference of the society. And thirdly, of course, there is a minority, well, I mean, I can't gauge it, but there is a minority that does not support the war. They do know, too, that if they hit the streets or protest in front of the local police station or mobilization office, they will be carted off to jail for anything starting from whatever 3 to 5 years, or maybe even more, depending on the sentence, and all sorts of paralegal changes to the Russian laws, which basically now help punish any protest against the government very viciously, have been in place for at least the last couple of years. So people are afraid, and that's very clear. So I would say that the majority wants to pretend that nothing happens. There is a significant minority that supports the war, and one has to add one more thing. There are, by now, I would say probably hundreds of thousands of families where men went to war for money. Mercenary is now a very honorable profession in Russia. And some of those people went back, very few. Some of those people went back maimed and disfigured. That's probably not too many too. A lot of them returned in zinc boxes and coffins, which is in Russian military parlance called cargo 200. Mm-hmm. And there are lots who never returned because they remained in the no man's land. And I think that by now we can say that, especially in provincial Russia, a significant number of families knows what goes on. And still there doesn't seem to be a significant shortage of volunteers to fight this very unjust, aggressive war for money. So in this respect, I would say Putin, I'm sure, today gets information that all quiet in the country. Nothing threatens the regime, no protests threaten the regime, and that is Putin's main preoccupation. And secondly, still has enough human resources to fight the war. So I suppose that this is the conclusion he makes now, if I may try to project sort of on you Putin's thoughts as far as I understand them.
Konstantin, can I project some thoughts on you? This is Biresh here, by the way. And before I just project those thoughts, there's compliments for you in the chat. John Doe saying, I'm always happy when Konstantin is on air, especially when he says exactly what he thinks without filtering it or sugarcoating it. We appreciate that. And there's also Murray Eldred who's saying it's great to see Eggert. I've not seen him in months on the internet, but we have been seeing you on DW before that. My question to you is basically, you were talking about, the provincial support for Putin, and that there is money that is motivating factor here. But then in the initial years of the war, and also now, potentially, arguably, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of support for Putin from the rural areas of Russia, right? From the peripheries of Russia, away from the main cities, which have sent fighting men to fight for Putin. And a lot of them haven't done that for money, right? They were already in the army, and then they were fighting for Vladimir Putin. But then they've also been taking all these losses. Despite that, why do they continue to support President Putin?
Yes, I think that you can't call it support for Putin that much. I don't think that these people think in such terms. For them, this regime, if you wish, is the regime under which they can earn a lot of money. A lot by the standards of, let us say, a Russian town of 300,000 people. That's not a big city in Russia. So you go to a major provincial capital, or you go to, let's say, St. Petersburg or Moscow, to a recruitment center, and you sign up. In exchange, you get 5 million rubles. In current exchange rate, that's something like 50,000-60,000 euros. I haven't looked up the exchange rate recently, but let's say it's 50,000 euros. Let us put it like that. In Moscow, even in Moscow, it would be a significant salary in a corporation for someone who is a very well-qualified professional. If you look at a city of 300,000 people or 200,000 people, let's say Blagoveshchensk on the Chinese border, there probably someone will earn 1/10 or 1/5 of the sum in a year. So I think that lots of people think this is just my chance. And these people used to live in very sort of limited social and economic circumstances. They never traveled anywhere. They don't speak foreign language. They never got proper education. They work, well, simple menial jobs. Quite a few of them went to prison before. Quite a few of them drank. And I think that they think, oh, that's my chance. They don't think about consequences. I spoke to someone just like 3 days ago, someone whose relatives live in such a town. And this actually lady, this woman, told me, even although these coffins return, or some of them do not return at all because they are pulverized by Ukrainian shelling, for example, on the positions, there are still people that are ready to get on and get going to the front. Moreover, this person said to me, in my hometown, there is a whole new middle class of wives and widows of those who died and who received this compensation. They are buying fur coats, they are buying apartments, because apartments are dirt cheap in such places. And people look at them and think, oh, well, by the way, probably that's not such a bad deal. I know I'm sounding cynical and paradoxical, but this is the reality of a lot of towns in provincial Russia. And what I mean by provincial, I don't mean 10,000 people. I mean 200,000, 250,000. That still could be quite attractive for men to go and sign up there.
Okay. Konstantin, thank you very much. We've also got Katarzyna Zusk, who is from the Norwegian Institute for Defence Studies with us. So it'd be good to bring you both back onto the screen so that you can perhaps react to one another. Previously, we were talking a little bit about why, you know, what Putin's goals are over Ukraine and why he is so determined to have Ukraine in particular. And Katarzyna, let me just ask you that, you know, so much focus on that. Is it now, has he put so much in that he can't now, that there's no way that he can let it go, because a lot has, these, you know, as we've talked about, manpower, people have died, the expense of it all, it's become so much more global. Is there no way back for Putin now, apart from to press on?
It will be very hard. So we talked about the the larger sort of strategic long-term objectives, which are certainly feeding into this war. But there are this what happened over the past 3 years, and yes, we talked about the significant segments of the Russian society have become entangled in the war through gaining basically in different ways from the war effort. They may have vested interest in continuation, but also the Putin regime's future appears increasingly tied to its capacity to sustain this war economy. It's an economic model that it will be hard to dismantle, I think, even if there will be a ceasefire. So it does seem that Putin has bound its political fate to the war economy, and that the war outcome of the war itself is directly connected to the fate of the regime and Putin in person, and that, of course, unfortunately, that's where we are. I think it's also because there is so much that has been invested, but in terms of prestige, but also resources and human life, etc. It will be very hard for Putin's regime to sell anything as a victory. Of course, you know, the propaganda machinery runs over time, and they can sell a lot. But there are also limits to what they can sell as a victory. So yes, they will be working for some tangible results. I think when he made the decision in September 2022 to annex the territories, that's where that's where he sealed the fate. I mean, he had to make some kind of win. Of course, the definition of victory is changing, but again, it's yes, as you say, so much has been wasted and lost and invested in this war. It's hard to just backtrack.
It's interesting you say that, Professor Zisk, because we wanted to bring in a comment from user Caden Tan, who, as you began to answer Alex's question, wrote in the chat, I mean, Russia doesn't want to end it because they are running a war economy now. And if they end it, they would suffer economically. So it's win or die for Putin. That was the comment that they made. So I think a lot of the chat is also seeing it in the way that you were describing it.
I'd just like to... Yes, sorry. Do answer that, and then I just want to press on with another question.
Yeah, very briefly. No, I think at some point, yes. I mean, they even if the war will end, does not necessarily mean that the economic model of the war economy will actually stop. And we can see that in this enormous, huge ambitions for military buildup in Russia. That, you know, in December 2022, they set in motion this large-scale military reform. And the ambitions are enormous. We are talking about, you know, two combined armies, 16 brigades, 14 divisions, huge number of people, 1.5 standing army. Of course, these are still on the paper. And as long as Russia is fighting in this full-scale invasion, they will probably not manage to get that, because everything, Ukraine is priority number one. But it shows, it gives an idea of the direction, and the direction is continuing huge military buildup.
Konstantin, I just want to ask you, do you think Putin has a bigger goal than just Ukraine?
Alex, he does. And this goal is essentially having a pliant Ukrainian state with a puppet regime in Kiev. I do not think he dreams of occupying the whole of Ukraine. First of all, he doesn't have the resources to do it. Second, it will mean guerrilla warfare, especially in the sort of nationalistically minded western areas of Ukraine. One thing to add to what Professor Katarzyna Zysk said is that the war economy itself can be put on civilian basis after the war. It's not unheard of, to put it mildly. The problem is not the economy as such. The problem is that such change will mean immediate problems for the regime, for the stability of the political regime domestically. Because imagine if you have, I don't know, a factory producing military boots, or shell casings in, let us say, the same Blagoveschensk 200,000 people. Probably they won't do it on the Chinese border, though, somewhere deeper in the mainland. And it used to work one shift before February 2022, and people were getting, I don't know, 20,000 rubles. Now they're working 3 shifts, 24/7, and people are getting 60,000 rubles per month. Now you stop it. You don't need so many shells anymore. Okay, for some time you work to replenish the stocks, but generally have to stop. And this means that things suddenly start to go sort of southward for the people. And people start saying, oh, by the way, what's this Putin doing in Moscow? So it becomes potentially an instability risk for Putin. And for Putin, the main thing is to maintain his regime. That is his number one concern. And because of that, the war works for the regime as long as there is no visible defeat. Mm-hmm. As Professor said, I mean, it's difficult to say what exactly can and cannot be sold as a victory, although I think with Russian propaganda, you can sell quite a bunch of stuff to people as victory and they wouldn't even notice. But in the end, it is about the stability. And in this respect, there are limits to what can and cannot be done in this respect. The war, for so far, works for Putin.
And do you think that Putin wants more than just Ukraine? I know you just said that you don't think he wants to occupy the whole of Ukraine, Konstantin. But do you think that when the time is right, he would possibly take on another state, possibly even a NATO state?
Yes, he does want Belarus, which is called Ukraine. That's true. I mean, a protectorate, essentially. Well, it's bigger, so it's going to be more complex. But still, he wants a government in Kiev that will call him every morning and ask, you know, what can we have for lunch, fish or meat? As for touching other NATO states, I think it is a possibility, although I do not think we're talking about the invasion. I think Putin understands that, first and foremost of all, any attempt to amass significant forces even if, let's say, the war is over in Ukraine, and put them on the border of, I don't know, Finland or Lithuania, where I live, or somewhere else, will be visible. Everyone will know about it. You can't hide an invasion force. So there will be a reaction. And he by now knows that, after especially Finland and Sweden joined NATO, you have huge risks running now, let's say, northwestern Russia, even if you try to do something in the Baltic states. I mean, Finnish howitzers can reach directly the center of St. Petersburg now. So I think that what he's thinking about, and that's just my supposition, is a provocation on the level of kind of satiric deniability, if I can call it in such a way, against a NATO country, probably a Baltic state or Poland, in which, let us imagine, a group of so-called veterans, suddenly very well armed, crossing the border, capturing a border town under some pretext, let us say Narva in Estonia or Panemunia in Lithuania, holding down the flag, shooting a couple of policemen, burning down the customs house, and running away back on the Russian territory. So it is an act of aggression, but it's not a full-scale invasion.
Okay.
And Putin's goal will be then to wait for the North Atlantic Council to meet in Brussels and to hear NATO states like Hungary, Slovakia, maybe some southern Mediterranean states saying, look, we don't know where this Narva is situated. We're not going to start Third World War because of Narva. This is going to be the end of Article 5 in Putin's view, and that's going to be a metaphorical end of NATO. I think that this scenario is possible. And I would say that if it is possible, it's possible in the coming years.
And Katarzyna, can I just get your take on that then? Do you think that that is a possibility? Is that the most likely scenario, do you think?
So I think it depends. I mean, that's where the opportunism comes in. It depends where there would be a loophole that he could exploit. There is still this cost-benefit calculus. So it will depend on the situation, how he'll be reading NATO, how he'll be reading where he can get really slapped severely his hands. But I think it's important to understand that the regime has quite antagonistic view of the international relations and relations with other great powers, where they constantly, from Moscow, it seems like they constantly, there is a constant rivalry, the main objective for each great power seen from Moscow is to expand its sphere of influence, which is seen as a zero-sum game. If one great power wins some territory, another loses. There is very little win-win here. So if Russia doesn't move forward, they get back. So there is this expansion actually is built into that thinking. It doesn't stop. And it doesn't necessarily mean controlling a territory. It doesn't necessarily mean using military means, but using political, economic, informational. We are seeing that. This is not going to stop. But if there is an opening for expanding the Russian reach, they certainly, I think this regime will be moving forward. Again, this is also because it is seen as actually a defensive move. So when Russia says that the war in Ukraine is actually a defense, they actually mean that. Mm-hmm. It's basically expanding it's increasing its security through expansion. And so that's a very typical part of the Russian strategic culture, which again points to that this is not going to stop anytime soon. It depends again on the possibilities that will open up, how he will read NATO, how he will read the Trump administration, what will be Russia's capabilities. But unfortunately, I am not optimistic about that, knowing what I've learned about Russia for the past 20 years.
Konstantin, I saw you raise your hand there. You wanted to come in with something briefly.
Yes, Birash Alex, I think that an important thing here to understand is that Putin's war in Ukraine, we call it Putin's aggression against Ukraine, which is pretty logical. But in the mind of Putin and the way it is presented to the Russian public, it is not the war against Ukraine. It is a war against NATO. Ukraine is presented as just a tool of a global West to aggress and subjugate, you bluff at it, Russia. So in a sense, you cannot stop this global conflict that you announced unless you can present some kind of very sort of vivid proofs that you won. And as long as you cannot, this conflict has to go on. Sorry to paraphrase Freddie Mercury, the show must go on. You know, it's the way this regime works. It will not be able to stop. And as Katarzyna rightly said, it will be a calculus whether it's too dangerous to kind of try and tickle any of the frontline NATO states or not. And many considerations, economic, societal, security, foreign policy, all that will come into this analysis. But it seems like both of us do not exclude it.
OK, thank you both very much. We really appreciate your time. Konstantin Egert, Katarzyna Zusk, very, very appreciative for all that analysis that you gave us and for your thoughts on what is going on in Ukraine and possibly further afield as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And the poll, we had a good question today, and I'm interested to know what the most popular answer was, even though there were some people saying none of the above.
Yeah, but we do get quite a lot of votes for our poll question. Let me just repeat the question. What's really going on between Trump and Putin? We've got 536 votes. 58% goes to Putin's playing Trump. 25% said it's just political theater, 9% says Trump's fine playing along, and 6% says Trump is in control. So I think most people don't think that Trump is actually in control.
So an overwhelming minority believe that Donald Trump is in control.
Overwhelming minority. Yeah. I like the way you phrase that. Thank you for that, Jerry. Thanks everyone for voting, and also thanks very much for all your questions and your comments.
Yeah, lots of interesting comments. I'll just leave one before as we're closing out. This one from Bart Vondesko saying Putin is 72 years old. This won't last forever. So that's one comment just to close out this discussion. Thanks so much for joining. We are going to put up the theme for next week's News Desk 24 hours in advance on our community tab. So you can check out what that subject is going to be. Maybe we're going to be talking about Russia again. I don't know.
Who knows? I'm not committing myself, but we'll see you next week. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Bye.